Good afternoon, everybody. I'm PCT Senior Digital Editor Brad Harbison. I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Contraceptives, the role they play in your integrated pest management program, presented by SenesTech. I want to thank you all for taking some time out of your day to be a part of this program, and we hope you get a lot out of it. So during the next hour, we're going to learn how contraceptive baits work, and also where this technology might fit into your rodent IPM program. One quick note to pass along before we introduce today's speakers. The views expressed in today's webinar are those of the speaker and not necessarily the PCT Media Group or parent company GIE Media. The presentation made during this webinar does not constitute an endorsement of the vendor or speaker's views, products, or services. Okay, I'm going to now introduce today's speaker, Ryan McMillan, who will walk you through this afternoon's event. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ryan first. He is a technical sales representative for SenesTech, and he's been with SenesTech for more than 3 years now. He's also held the title of Field Service Technician. And during his time at SenesTech, Ryan has worked with rats and mice in field and lab settings, conducting trapping, animal care, euthanasia, and necropsies on rodents. So prior to SenesTech, Ryan worked in field settings trapping rodents, raccoons, skunks, coyotes, bobcats, javelina, bats, birds, and reptiles. And Ryan holds a BS in Environmental and Sustainability Science, as well as Wildlife, Ecology, and Management from Northern Arizona University. And with that, we're going to turn things over to Ryan. Ryan?
Thank you, Brad, for the introduction. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here presenting today with everybody. So as Brad stated, I've been with SenesTech for over 3 years now, and I've actually held numerous titles over those years and experienced a lot out in the field. I spent a lot of time out in the field working with rats, and even prior to SenesTech, I've been in the industry as a pest control technician, dealing primarily with rats, but a lot of the diverse wildlife that comes in the state of Arizona and the unique pest control solutions that we have to administer here. So welcome everyone. We appreciate you taking the time to learn about contraceptives and the role that they play in your IPM programs. One moment here. So the outline of my presentation today is as follows. So I'll start with a brief explanation and some background on rodents and rodent control history. We'll discuss integrated pest management and the importance of initial site inspections especially, and some of the signs of rodents that you want to be looking for while you're out in the field. We'll dive into how you can enhance your current IPM program and the history of fertility control and how it's managed other pest species in the past. We'll talk about some of the downsides to these non-lethal approaches, and I'll explain the ideal characteristics that we need to be looking for when we're trying to find a fertility control tool to fit in your IPM program. And we'll end this presentation with an explanation on rat reproduction and why contraceptives are a relevant tool for IPM, and we'll actually have some time for question and answers then as well. So I'll start by briefly introducing our species of interest for this webinar, that being rats. So Norway rats, or brown rats as we call them, are a species most of us are way too familiar with, right? They've originated from Mongolia, and by the early 18th century, they actually successfully inhabited European countries, and through their shipping routes, they made it into the US by the mid-18th century. They're travelers. They're conditioned to temperate regions, but are highly adaptive animals. They aren't excluded to those regions alone. They can inhabit numerous environments. And they successfully migrated through the continental tropics, traveling coast to coast through human settlements. And of course, they're most widely known for the spread of the bubonic plague. So Norway rats are very successful travelers, as I noted. Over the last 400 years, they've made it to every continent besides Antarctica. So humans are what made this possible. They are so successful because of the perfect conditions we create in our cities with shelter, food, and water. Our other species of interest today is the roof rat, or the black rat. And the black rat's actually believed to be of arboreal origin, or a tree-dwelling origin, nesting in trees from forested areas of Southeast Asia. They occupied Europe since Roman times, but were largely displaced by the booming Norway rat populations that we saw in the early 18th century. Those Norway rats were highly competitive and kind of drove them out of some of those areas. They're conditioned to temperate and subtropical zones and are found near coastal areas. And they're actually a very large threat to island conservation. They can prey on native and endangered species, especially avian species, and their eggs, and they're a very large threat to those species. So what's important to note here is that both Norway and roof rats are highly adaptive pests. These traits are general guidelines, right? So both species can be found in environments that aren't typical. So to effectively control and prevent rats, it's really important for us to hone in and recognize the rodent's physiology and behavior. So I'll start with a quote here by Bobby Corrigan, who's a rodent biologist that we're all very familiar with. He states that understanding rodent physiology can help us to understand rodent behavior and how they interact with their environment. What Bobby's stating here is that he's really stressing the importance of noting what rats are doing and recognizing why they are in a given area. So physiology and behavior together are a set of characteristics which allow rodents to be such successful pests. Rats migrated with us and they learn to adapt to us. So we need to use very clever ways to combat them. They're really they're just successful animals. So thus, integrated pest management is the standard for our industry, right? It's the most effective approach to control any pest. The Center for Disease Control explains that IPM is a long-term, effective, holistic approach to managing pests of all kinds by carefully combining various interventions in ways that minimize environmental hazards and deficiencies that affect people's health. This means that we should be utilizing all of the tools available in a way that is safe and efficacious. So even furthermore, the EPA has set a 4-tier implementation approach to IPM. They outline this as such. So we need to set action thresholds, or we need to set a level at which control tactics are initiated. We need to monitor and identify for pests. Monitoring is crucial. We can gather information about population size and activity levels by monitoring. We need to perform prevention or make areas less attractive to those pests in the first place. And finally, we need to control them. So these 4 steps in this order really outlines the foundation of your IPM program. And it all starts with the initial site inspection, something that's often overlooked. So the initial site inspection consists of setting your action threshold and monitoring and identifying for pests. We want to determine the breadth of the infestation, so where are rodents present throughout the site? This can give us the information necessary to determine the size, the scope, and the intensity of your IPM program. What are the types of the rodent activity on the site? Are there droppings that we're witnessing? Are there runways along buildings? Where are we seeing burrows at? Is there any foraging evidence on trees, fruit-bearing trees, or dumpsters? And then we really want to record where rodents are gaining entry and what they're feeding on. So are there gaps under doors or garages? Is there a breach in the attic? Where are rats getting into this building? And are rats feeding on the citrus tree out back or a dumpster out front? Those are some important food sources to really take note of. The information that you gather in your site inspection is imperative to your IPM program. This information will be used at every additional step moving forward as we progress. So what are some of these basic principles? Understanding rodent behavior and ecology is essential for successful treatment. So by gathering information on how rats are behaving and how they interact with each other and their environment, it really gives us the clues we need to build a successful program. So if we place a heavy emphasis on just controlling populations with poisons alone, and not enough on the science and ecology principles of those species, we aren't going to effectively control or prevent a population. It's kind of a band-aid. So a thorough inspection should be done prior to any treatment to determine the best approach. Starting with treatment isn't the first step. We really have to assess everything. We need to always consider the species of interest and the characteristics of their environment or site and collect the necessary clues to build a strong treatment plan moving forward. So what are some of these cues we need to be looking for? You know, generally rodents are nocturnal and elusive animals. They're a prey species. A night inspection is the best time to go out and observe rodent sightings and sounds. We can witness rats when they're in their peak activity hours and when they're most comfortable. That's when the chance of predation is lowest. So if rodents are seen regularly during the day, what it indicates to us when we're on that inspection is that that's a really heavy infestation. It means that competition is so high at night that these less dominant rats are shifting their internal clock to be active during the day. This is a huge risk, you know. It reduces competition, but it increases their chance of predation. Things can see them during the day. Some other cues, you know, sounds are produced by rodents, and these include high-pitched squeaks. They can include gnawing sounds when they're in an attic, scratching, digging, and sounds of rodents fighting. You know, rodents can be highly vocal, especially when that population is high and they're all competing against each other. Rodent odors from urine and body glands can also be highly detectable in well-established infestations. And these odors can be particularly pronounced and may persist for prolonged periods of time. They're really unpleasant, and you'll know the exact smell after you experience it once or twice. So by seeing rats, hearing them, and smelling them, we can be really confident in knowing there is an infestation present. So what are some of these inspection techniques that we need to be looking for? As I mentioned previously, performing an inspection at night really offers advantages over your day inspections. We can witness peak rodent activity when human activity is at the lowest. We can really estimate population size based on activity, and we can see where rats are coming from and where they're going. We can also utilize tools which need darkness. So black lights can illuminate rodent urine, and there are also products on the market right now which rodents eat, and it makes their droppings illuminate under black light as well. They're very useful tools. So by conducting night inspections, we can help identify points of rodent entry. That helps us with exclusion. We can detect elevated runways of roof rats in dark settings or hard to reach areas, and we can identify the extent of rodent urine and contamination in buildings. We can also demonstrate to clients any areas of structural deficiencies or harborage that really require some cleanup. So some of the techniques that we're utilizing during inspections today are pretty high tech. You know, the innovation of wildlife cameras has been a great tool for the pest control industry. So motion sensing wildlife cameras are a tool that is becoming more prevalent. And this is because it reduces a lot of the man hours that we need out in the field. So these cameras allow us to gather useful information about rats and their environment without being on site late at night. We don't have to be out there at 3 in the morning, right? This camera can do it for us. By using these cameras and investing time into analyzing those photos, what we can do is witness much of what we see in night inspections, and we can also gather information about that population size and the demographics of that population. We can monitor the number of adults and juveniles, and if we see that there's a presence of juveniles, what it indicates is that that's a breeding population. And we can count how many rodents are in an area, which gives us a good estimate on the population size of that specific environment or site. Demographics of rat populations can tell us if the population is growing, if it's receding, or if it's staying at a relatively constant level, if it's on a plateau. One moment here. Sorry, I'm having some trouble switching slides. Just give me a second. Okay, there we go. So another technique that we can use during our inspections is tracking plates. So these are tiles or another flat, thin, portable surface covered in chalk or other fine powder substances. And by placing these tracking plates in areas of suspected rodent foot traffic, we can capture their footprints on that plate. They lift that chalk up and we can see where they stepped. So leaving these tiles out for 24 to 48 hours, a day or two, we can check for those track marks, and then any visible tracks that we witness there indicate that rodents or some other animal were present and walked over the tile. So this tool is really helpful for confirming rodent runways, entry points, or frequented trails, right? If we have enough of these plates out, we can get a really good sense of where rats are moving about in that site. So after we provide a detailed inspection, using what we just went through there, we can begin outlining what our integrated pest management program really starts to look like. The underlying goal of any IPM program is to prevent those pests from ever becoming a threat to our site, right? So by utilizing preventative techniques, we can eliminate infestations that are unforeseen. Bobby Corrigan has a general rule with this. He states that 80% of our time should be spent on prevention and 20% should be spent on control. So what he means with prevention and the 80% of your time, you know, this is your exclusion and sanitation. We need to eliminate entrances and food sources for rats as best as possible. And this is what makes a site less attractive to those pests in the first place. That remaining 20% of your time should be spent on control. This is where we're removing rats by trapping or administering conventional baits in this case. So let's dive into each of these a little bit more. So prevention. In order for us to eliminate food sources through sanitation and exclusion, ultimately, you know, preventing rats in the first place is by honing in on what we learned during that initial site inspection. During the inspection, we should have noted some really important information. For example, the overflowing bird feeder in your backyard. That's a pretty well-established food source. The pet food spilled in the garage that's accessible via the hole under the garage. The damaged dumpster lid in the back alley where rats are pouring in and out of, or the hole in the ceiling. This is all important information that should have been documented there, and that's what's really gonna let us hone in on what needs to be prevented there. So by fixing these problems, we're preventing infestations, and prevention is the absolute backbone of your program, where you spend 80% of your time. That remaining 20% is control. So after prevention tactics are established, we can begin control campaigns. We can utilize a chemical bait, which are typically lethal, and we need to ensure that we're using these baits. They're carefully selected, they're rotated, and they're administered in a safe manner. We can use mechanical means of removal by trapping. This is typically the safest form of control in terms of environmental impact. And we can also utilize biological control. This is rare, but an example would be relying on birds of prey to hunt rats in a large outdoor environment. So we've laid out all of the traditional tools which are used in your integrated pest management program. But how do we enhance this program even further? How can we boost those results of your IPM program? And the answer is fertility control. So this is a tool that we can add to your IPM machine to increase prevention tactics as well as control. So if we think of your IPM program as this machine here with cogs as your tools, it's all a moving part, right? So by implementing fertility control, we can boost your efficiency. It helps your prevention side with sanitation and exclusion, and it also helps your control side with your lethal, biological, and chemical controls. It helps the whole machine to function a little bit more smoothly. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So fertility control is not a new concept at all, right? We're all very familiar with it. There's numerous methods in use today for a lot of different species, which include feral horses, for example, or overpopulated deer in some of our eastern states. And it can come in the form of steroids and hormones, sterilization via castration or other surgeries. We have immunocontraceptive vaccines, and also non-hormonal contraceptives. So although fertility control has been around, it's relatively new in rodent control. And it's important to note that each of these forms of fertility control are different, and they operate under unique modes of action. So some are better for others at controlling species. There are some downsides to these non-lethal approaches. Reproductive control via steroids or hypothalamic hormones can possibly transfer to the food chain and affect more than just that individual. The coyote could ingest some of that, right? It can pose some environmental impacts, and it may affect physiology and behavior as well. It can make that rat population, or the species of interest here, act far differently than they typically would. Immunocontraceptive vaccines sometimes require multiple doses, which can be very labor intensive and expensive. This requires trapping an individual animal, putting them under euthanasia, and injecting them with a vaccine. You can imagine how long that takes and the resources it takes to do that. They can also cause some site injection reactions as an unintended consequence of that vaccine. Traditional contraceptives or hormonal contraceptives have an effect on physiology and behavior of animals as well. It makes them act different, and that's important because it can make them easier to prey upon. Hormonal contraceptives also have the potential to bioaccumulate. So these chemicals are incorporated into the tissue of the animal that ingested it, the initial taker, right? They can also change an animal's behavior or genetics, which makes them more susceptible to predation. They can offset sex ratios beyond what a species should naturally be at. We can have way more of one sex in a population than the other. And they can also cause deformities or alter mating behavior. On the contrary, non-hormonal contraceptives do not show signs of tissue accumulation. They break down rapidly, and they actually pose no threat to the environment. A non-hormonal option is ideal because it lacks the unintended consequences to the animal itself and its surrounding environment, the soil, the water, and the predators that feed on that individual. Just one moment here, we've got a lag in changing slides. Should change here shortly. Okay, so the concept of biomagnification is really easy to understand. It's the persistent buildup of a substance in the food chain. So we can really visualize this with this diagram here. So water may contain a trace amount of a substance, right? And then zooplankton filter on that water, feed on the particulate in that water, and begin accumulating that substance in their tissue at much higher concentrations than just the water alone. A small fish eats thousands of those zooplankton and then is ingesting the substance at a much higher concentration. This happens again when the large fish eats that smaller fish, and then the apex predator, in this case, the fish-eating bird of prey, eats the large fish and ingests the highest amount of that substance, bioaccumulated all throughout the food chain. So if we're looking for favorable characteristics of a non-hormonal contraceptive, it must be broken down rapidly in the target animal so it doesn't bioaccumulate, and it needs to be excreted in an inactive form. And these characteristics mitigate the tool from ever biomagnifying in the first place. So an ideal fertility control product has these following features and traits. It's highly effective at reducing fertility, number one. It operates on multi-year durations. It's a long-term solution. It's reversible and has no effect on social structure or sexual behavior in that population. It also has no effect on existing pregnancies. This means rats live as they were, just without the ability to reproduce. There's no toxicity to the recipient or the applicator, thus making it safe. And it can't pass through the food chain to other animals it wasn't intended for. We don't want to affect the fertility of a predator, just that species or that pest. And it can be delivered remotely, such as in a bait station, as we do with conventional rodenticides. It also needs to be cost effective, and it doesn't require vast amounts of labor to administer, like some of those vaccines. So Bobby Corrigan states that sanitation is ultimately pest control, that pest exclusion is pest prevention, and that pest prevention is public health, right? Public health is what we're all ultimately after here. So rats pose a threat to public health through disease from their waste, from their bites, and unsanitary living conditions. So we need to control rats to protect public health. And sometimes this can be a challenge if we're using just conventional methods in our IPM machine alone. And this is because rats are such prolific breeders. They breed year-round, nonstop, and males continue to mate with any new prospects while other female rats are pregnant. And females can actually get pregnant within 24 hours of giving birth. And these traits are what make rats so successful. They can breed themselves out of trouble. So in order to understand kind of the reproductive capacity of these animals, it's also important to dive into population dynamics a little bit. And this is really simple. If rats give birth to more individuals than the number of deaths, then that population increases, right? We have an increase. If rats give birth to the same number of individuals as the number of deaths, then the population stays the same. It's a plateau. It's not decreasing, it's not increasing, it's constant. If that population can decrease, then what we need is the number of deaths to exceed the number of births. So by utilizing lethal methods, we can influence that death rate and a population reduction can be achieved. But with abundant resources, rats can breed any survivors that live through that lethal campaign, can breed and quickly rebound back to your initial population size, thus making you start over. So this is exactly why contraceptives can help your IPM program. If we can utilize contraceptive pest management tool for rodents, we can prevent the source of the infestation, which is reproduction. Active ingredients work on male and female rats. This results in sustained contraception with continued consumption. And a contraceptive does not decrease the population instantly, but there's a benefit to this. This is because alpha rats will still control their territories, and that prevents immigration. We still have this. We aren't creating a void when we're treating these rats, right? They're still there. They're able to defend that territory and fend off any others that are trying to come in and utilize those resources. And so with fewer births, the population can't grow as it typically would in response to increases in food and shelter. So rats that do not die and retain the ability to reproduce will continue to breed. This is why contraceptives can give you an edge to controlling them. So what's unique to a fertility control tool is that it can help with prevention and control. It's not exclusive to just one side of your machine. We can improve IPM effectiveness by driving populations down in the first place, thus preventing the rodents. And it also keeps the population down, thus controlling them. So a tool that does both can be key to the overall success of your integrated pest management solution. By decreasing the need to constantly respond to those population spikes, it allows you to focus on what's most important, prevention. We can decrease product loss, we can decrease damage, and really increase our customer retention by utilizing this tool. You can shift your focus on what matters most, which is your business. So to summarize, a well thought out IPM program is your key to successfully controlling rats. By understanding rodent behavior and physiology, or thinking like a rat, right? Getting down and getting dirty and really understanding these sites. That's what uncovers crucial clues to prevention and control. So making sure you have a robust site evaluation or inspection helps you build the appropriate action plan, which is the most effective for your given situation. There's no two sites that are exactly the same. That site inspection is what really gives us the information we need to know in building the ultimate IPM program. Your IPM program should consist of 80% prevention and 20% control. And fertility control is unique, and it's a viable tool that can help prevent and control infestations. And most importantly, contraceptives target the root cause of your rat problem, that being reproduction. By targeting reproduction, you're boosting the results of your IPM program. Your IPM machine can run more efficiently and more smoothly. So that concludes the presentation, and thank you everybody for your time, and I'll now take any questions that we have.
Thank you, Ryan. Terrific presentation, very informative about new technology that a lot of folks are interested in. Excuse me. We're going to jump into the questions here. Some questions that came in. The first one was, you noted that contraceptives are part prevention and part control. Would you recommend implementing a contraceptive from the very beginning of an IPM program?
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, so the answer is yes. So this is an excellent way to get ahead in controlling populations. By implementing that contraceptive from the get-go, we can start to eliminate those future generations of rats from ever being born in the first place.
Thanks, Ryan. The next question I'll take. A couple folks had asked about getting a copy of the presentation, and yes, we're recording this. And once the event is over, we'll edit it and clean it up, and we'll post it up on our website. And we'll also provide a copy to folks at SenesTech, so you can contact your rep there and access it from them as well. Ryan, the next question we had was, what rodent fertility control products are available to the pest control industry?
So currently, Contraceptives is available, and that's created by SenesTech, the company that I work for. It's a non-hormonal rodent contraceptive bait that is proven to boost your IPM program results and minimize rodent populations.
Next question we had was, can contraceptive control be used on its own, or is it best to implement contraceptives within an IPM program?
Thanks. So an integrated pest management program, which is really tailored to your specific site, is the best way to efficiently and effectively control rat populations, right? IPM is very important. Although it's possible to see results using just fertility control alone, I don't think it's ideal. You can boost these results by utilizing it in pair with your other tools of choice, by influencing that death rate and then keeping that population suppressed with fertility control.
Ryan, you had noted that after a contraceptive treatment that alpha rats can still control territories. What is the benefit of this?
Yeah, so this is strange, right? We're used to, you know, a dead rat is a good rat, right? And that's a pretty old saying in the industry. So because contraceptives are non-lethal, rats are able to go about their lives without the ability to reproduce. The benefit of this is that those rats will still control their given territories, and that stops other rats from coming into that area. Additionally, these rats that are unable to reproduce but are still alive in that environment, they're also competing for the same food sources, and that limits the amount of rats that can be in a given area. You know, they're going after that same food as well.
Ryan, a question we have here says, you know, I'm a PMP and we're having trouble gaining long-term rodent control at certain accounts. After knocking down the population with the rodenticides, the rats return in a few months, and pretty soon they're back to their initial numbers. Why might fertility control products be implemented and be a good choice for these challenging accounts?
Yeah, so that's exactly why Contraceptives was created. You know, by adding Contraceptives to your existing IPM program and implementing it with those rodenticides and traps and prevention and exclusion that you already have out there, you can mitigate that constant population rebound that you're probably very familiar with, that are always coming back. And it mitigates that by suppressing their ability to reproduce. They aren't able to have a bunch of juveniles and bring that population back up to the peak. That's why it gives you the edge in some of those challenging accounts.
Okay, it looks like that's all we had as far as questions, but if folks did have some additional questions for you that they'd like to follow up with, what's the best way they can get a hold of you, Ryan?
They can reach me at my first name, Ryan, last name .McMillan, McMillan, at SenesTech.com, and I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that they might have.
Okay, great. Well, Ryan, thanks again for your presentation, and we appreciate you guys bringing this webinar to our audience. And with that, I'll just kind of just a reminder again, we did tape it if anybody wants to get a copy of it. And with that, Ryan, I'll just kind of turn things back over to you if you want to mention any kind of final words for our attendees.
Yeah, just thank you everyone for taking the time. This is a tool by implementing fertility control, you can really boost the results of your IPM machine, and it really can give you the edge in some of those accounts and allow you to really focus on your business. So if you want to learn more, please do reach out. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and thanks again to all of our attendees for participating and asking your questions during today's webinar. Have a great day, everybody.